the way you made them feel. Sounds really great. I didn't write it. This is my end of it. But for us, why that's important is because real estate is a people business, right? And what we say and what we do and the way we treat people either opens the door for conversation and relationship and business to be done, or it closes it. So part of what we're talking about today is how we're treating one another, how we're respecting one another in the workplace, and all of our differences, and the benefits of those differences, specifically in the workplace. Right? So I'd like to ask that as you engage today, that you be excited and open-minded and just let it flow. We're going to learn about ourselves today, we're going to learn about others today, and this is all part of our... Sorry. I heard that.
That was a compliment.
So we're going to be taking a look at diversity, and as a part of our Crew 2018 theme, which is the Innovative Leader. And this particular section focuses on leveraging diversity. I understand we have a short video we'd like to show, and then I'm going to bring up Sharon Crone, MCC, to do a short interactive presentation with us. Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Trish. Well, welcome everyone. And just a shout out to Emily Portugal, because she had recommended to our team
Yay,
the
Emily!
video designer who put together that video for us. So thank you, Emily. As you all know, and we mentioned, that this Innovative Leader series that we're running all year, we have put together as our Leadership and Professional Development Subcommittee a series of programs that our group had brainstormed at the beginning of our season to think about what are the various ways that we can create an innovative work environment. And one of the main ways that we can create an innovative work environment is by leveraging diversity, and by leveraging a diverse and inclusive environment, and that creates and helps create an innovative space. And I know in your white paper you highlighted that as well, so I'd like to point that out. That is how this subject of diversity and inclusion came up. We're going to explore today how a diverse workforce can advance the innovative work environment. And hopefully we'll have some takeaways today that each person can take back, that you can learn yourself, you can pick up some new ideas, and hopefully take back some commitments to your workplace that will help advance diversity and inclusion. So as an exercise now, we'd like to ask you to form 3 tables. So maybe we can ask these 2 tables to come together, so we could have a little bigger table. So if you wouldn't mind, I need to ask you 3 to move. But we can have the 4 table. So if you 2 can move here. And we'd like to just ask you to take a look at this photograph. Yeah, good. There we are. And we'd like you to look at this photograph and think about the story that this photograph is telling. If you can, you'll be discussing this with your group, and think about what is going on in this picture. Who is this person? What's happening? What is this person? Why is he here? Who, what, when, where, how? What is the story that you take away from this picture? And if you could just talk with your group, and we'd like to have one person who will represent the group, and just we're going to ask you to just feedback to the rest of us what story you see and your table sees in this picture. Okay? So chat, bring your own thoughts to it, your own experience, and And we'll give you about 5 minutes to talk about it, and then if you can nominate one person from your table to share with the rest of us, reflect on what's happening for you here. Okay? Any questions? No? You got it. Okay, you got 5 minutes. Okay, let's get ready for a talk back. So, if one table would like to start and give us your story. So we'd like to know, who is this person, what's he doing in the picture, you know, what's happening? Who would like to start? How about this table? How about this table? Who's the talker? Please, can you please introduce yourself to the group?
Hi, I'm Olivia Word. Our table was kind of talking about how he looked very contemplative, perhaps he's looking at something that he's longing for, or maybe feeling upset in some way. There was some argument about that. He's wearing a scarf, so we thought maybe it could be a religious garb. It could just be from like protection from sun or from cold. And then there was talk about Jerusalem and it looking similar to people, and like the wall in the background looking like, you know, possible ruins, although we were very aware of the fact that this looks like a setup.
So Jerusalem, maybe,
Yeah.
contemplative. Good. Okay, great.
Oh, and wisdom, there was a lot of talk about him looking very wise.
Okay, great.
We'll go.
Okay, off we go.
Thanks, Emily.
Okay, first of all, they took all of our answers.
What you got? What's going on in this picture?
Definitely on a quest, maybe like some sort of man journey, which is a term we're gonna trademark after this. I already put it on Instagram.
What did you call it? What's the word?
Man journey.
Man journey, all right, like that.
Maybe troubled, perhaps some sort of a spiritual vibe with his clothing, but he's definitely been through some stuff. There was talk of a Burt Reynolds reference, I don't know.
Burt Reynolds, yes.
But it's
Okay,
So that's
I like it.
our number.
Okay, we got Burt Reynolds here. What do we have here at this table? What story you got?
Well,
Janice, wait. Who
we
is
have, we have
this?
two different stories.
Okay, let's hear it.
Go with the best
We-
one first.
But
Don't go with the
It could either be a man who runs an ice cream truck and it's cold outside, so he's sad because he can't sell any ice cream right now.
Drop the mics.
That was a possibility. The other possibility is that it is a man who's waiting for someone in a country where he needs to wear protective clothing from sand, storms. He's standing in front of an older building. We don't know whether that's because he's an architect thinking of how he's going to renovate it, or that he's reflecting on what he's going to do inside of it. We're not sure. And he's culturally from the local area that he's in how he's dressed.
Maybe Dubai.
Maybe Dubai.
From Turkey.
Yeah, what's Turkey?
Turkey. No bias.
Is man journey?
Oh, I don't know.
I was all one word, man journey. It's
What do
all
you think?
lowercase.
Hashtag.
Yeah.
Hashtag man
Right.
all one word.
They go on so many, you can't keep track.
Right, that's right.
Going to the grocery store.
There we go. Okay, maybe this is lowercase, yeah?
And they go to the restroom with security, I'm like, is it coming out? I don't know.
Riding in the car.
Burt Reynolds.
Walking the dog. Man.
Hi.
And this is an older version,
And
right?
walk as hell.
Okay. Here we got some of the, I like these, they're good.
Where's my microphone? We moved on.
Hello.
Hello. Okay, what you got?
Marianne, we had a few comments. First, hot climate, we thought, because of the wrath. We thought he could be in hiding because of the wrath. We also thought maybe he was someone of importance, possibly talking to a crowd or a congregation. We said he looked tired mentally, possibly in pain. And that maybe he's watching, like he said, sitting, watching, waiting for something. We questioned the blocks too, but they looked pretty even and straight, so we didn't think it was that old of a structure.
It's probably a brownstone in New York.
It looks like
Nice.
it looks like his mouth is open, so we didn't know if that's because he's breathing or if he's talking.
Okay. All right, so I just picked up a few words that kind of hit me. And maybe, Allison, would you mind reading us these words?
Ice cream truck, it feels like it's like a game show, doesn't it? Ice cream truck, Jerusalem, man journey, Burt Reynolds, hiding, congregation, well, congregation.
It's okay, they said that was a different word, I was just trying to. Hopefully everyone would correct each other.
Waiting.
Okay. So tell me what your reactions are. What are you noticing?
It's a wide variety.
A wide variety, yeah? What else? What do you notice? Everyone has a very different view. And here we are, we're just looking at a picture, right? I would propose to you that we bring so much of ourselves to the way we view the world. We all create stories, and those stories are based on our worldview, our experiences, our life, our families, the books we've read, where we've gone to school, where our children go to school, where we live, where we work. And those stories that we tell ourselves really shape the way we see the world. And the very interesting thing is we can all look at the same picture, an inanimate object, and see things that are so different. And they're all based on our own assumptions that we bring to this. And think about that, how much of the world that we see through our eyes at work every day, interacting with all kinds of people, we're seeing that really from our own unique perspective. And the interesting thing about it is that the assumptions that we bring that help us decide that this looks like Burt Reynolds or Jerusalem or a man journey or a congregation or an ice cream truck may not be true. They may not even be true. And so it's with that feeling of taking a pause and really questioning our own assumptions and opening our minds to a much broader world, a much bigger perspective, that I hope we can move into the subject we're talking about today. And we're lucky that we have three amazing panelists. We're really honored to have you all here. And I hope that we can open our minds, open our eyes, challenge our own assumptions, our own worldview, to learn something new today. So I would like to invite Caitlin, who is our moderator, and Emily Portugal, who are English Dixon, and Lily Graves, so please come up. And please give them a very warm applause. I'm so lucky to have you here. Caitlin Duran.
Okay, so I first would love to introduce you all because You're all extremely esteemed panelists, and we should know a little bit more about you. So first, I have the great honor of moderating the panel, and can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. And introducing our panelists. So we've got Collete English Dixon, who is no stranger to Crew. She was not only a former president of Crew Network, also a former president of Crew Chicago, and a former president of the foundation, the Crew Network Foundation. And she's currently the executive director of the Marshall Bennett Institute of Real Estate at Roosevelt University. Thank you so much for joining us. And then we have Emily Portugal. The slides might be out of order, but
It's
that's
cool.
all right.
You could just hang on Colette's picture. She looks
Oh, here
better
we go.
anyways. Oh, there I am.
There we found you. Okay, good. Emily Portugal, so she's currently vice president at Match Marketing Group, and she leads the business and marketing, new business and marketing in the Chicago office of the company. And she also serves as a brand consultant and creates lifestyle photography campaigns. And as you were told earlier, she was the genius behind our video that we've been playing all year that everyone has loved. So thank you, Emily. And then finally, we've got Linda Graves. So Linda is the Vice President of Diversity and Community Affairs at Gilbane Building Company. And in 2018, she received the Corporate Diversity Development and Advocacy Award by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. And in 2016, she received the Harriet Tubman Excellence in Leadership Award by the National Association of Minority Contractors. So we welcome Linda as well. So we're so grateful to have you all here, and we really appreciate you coming to share everything that you've experienced and the things that you do in your own careers that you've experienced in your lives. So I told everyone a little bit about you, but if you might just in turn take a minute to tell us a little bit more about yourself, what has brought you to your current place in your career, and then also how diversity has impacted who you are, your career path, and your current role.
I guess to start out, I think I've always been kind of the unique, diverse person in the room by a number of different measures. And so, the idea of being a young woman of color in the commercial real estate space has been something that's influenced my career from the day I showed up. So it's always been something that's been important to me. I have partnered my industry engagement with my efforts around gender and ethnic diversity in the real estate space, I think, since the beginning of time, at least as far as my career goes. So it's always been something that's been very, very important to me, and absolutely led into all of my engagements with Crew and with WLI at ULI and, whatever. At this point, I would say that in the role that I have at the moment, in the academic space at a very diverse university in the city of Chicago, leading a real estate program, it is honestly the convergence of about as many kind of appropriate matters in my life as I could probably have asked for, and that we're talking about diverse talent. And we're talking about diverse talent in real estate, and I get the opportunity to lead a program that's meant to develop that talent. And I have a diverse student body, so my goal is to somewhat take my interest and turn it into my action through my leadership of this program at Roosevelt. And I'd have to say, I hate to say I've been in this business for an incredibly long time. And it is really, really frustrating that we are still talking about this stuff. But it is important that we are still talking about it, and that we're talking about it in a much more inclusive manner. And we realize that it's not about just what we may want. It has to be a holistic response and a holistic engagement. And I think it's really great that we're moving in that direction because we can't make that change on our own. We tried that. It didn't work. So thanks. That's me. Thanks.
So it's hard to talk after Collete always, because she's so magnanimous and has such important things to say, and I just love you so much. I got into construction in the early 2000s. I got an internship, and it turned into a job, and I was working construction management in the suburbs, and I got involved with Crew kind of early on, luckily, and kind of gained exposure to different women that had kind of been on their own path for a lot longer than me. I'd never really thought about what it would be like to be a woman in construction at all. It seemed like a man journey for the most part, but I never really thought about it. I was happy to have a job. A lot of my friends were bartending, and I was happy to have a job. When I got involved with Crew, I mean, just being exposed to some of the women that are in this room tonight and just kind of hearing about the realities of working in the industry. And it's obviously not just this industry. I work in advertising now, and the boys club, I think, kind of expands to every industry for the most part. But, you know, for me, I think I'm at a point in my life where I'm a lot more open to learning about issues of diversity in the workplace. I don't think that I have an answer for it by any means. I think I look to people like Collete and Linda, who obviously have a lot of important things to say. And I'm just happy to be here with you guys and participate in the conversation. So thank you for having me.
Good evening, everyone. My journey really started many years ago in Southern California in the residential and commercial real estate development end of things, really steeped in building community. My passion is around building community. Communities of color, communities around inclusion, communities around opportunities. And I've been able to leverage really my passion in that work on behalf of a number of key organizations across that perspective that have been vast. Initially, it was on behalf of the Philip Morris companies, which was taboo at the time. But as a consumer packaged good companies that also had real estate interests, it was important that the communities that we were building, that there were opportunities for new libraries, opportunities for schools, healthcare, and then exposure to those opportunities by those that lived in those communities. And I had the opportunity to work in my passion even early on. Translated to moving to the Midwest, I had the opportunity to work in tribal gaming. Understanding the perspective of First Americans and some of the atrocities that they experienced and how they then sought to leverage what had been placed on them in terms of building community. And understanding how providing people with opportunities to support their families through sustainable employment really struck a passion within me. And was all through my journey, there literally has been someone that the universe has placed in my path to light the way, that saw something in me that would allow me to work in my passion. For the past now 13 years, I happen to be having the honor of working in commercial construction with the fifth generation family-owned organization that I have the chance to speak to our company's leadership on the legacy that they have built as a family and having an impact in the communities where we are building. And being able to bring the voice of not only women, but as a woman of color, and others that may not have that voice and share that passion, I really feel humbled to be able to have a seat at the table and really find the opportunity to speak on behalf of those that may not be there to speak themselves by challenging now what, and why not. And it continues to be a continuous opportunity because we can look around and we can find that there are still inequities that exist no matter what dimension that you may be thinking about. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I thank you all, and especially to my colleague, Carrie. Thank you for your work and what you're doing in helping to have an impact in our community. Thanks.
Thank you all. And you know, Linda, you mentioned inclusion and providing opportunities in community for voices and within where you work to promote voices. Collete, you mentioned developing talent and using that as an opportunity to create diversity and inclusion in our industry and in our workplaces. And then, you know, Emily, you mentioned just wanting to participate in the conversations that are happening and kind of lift up voices and lift up your own voice and participate in that. I would love if each of you could tell us how you define diversity and inclusion, where in the workplace, in our industry, in our communities, and the ways, maybe a story or maybe an example of how you were able to use your voice to promote diversity or inclusion in either your workplace or the community or what have you, so that we can hear kind of a tangible example of that.
All right, she's first up. So I certainly can reflect with my experience of what many of us are seeing now. We happen to be in the middle of a construction boom in most of the metropolitan areas and even in some of our more rural areas where companies are literally building data centers in the middle of Des Moines, Iowa, and in Utah, really bringing opportunities to communities that may not have had them in the past. Greenville, South Carolina is another. And what I see is no matter where we look, there is a gap that exists where families are finding it difficult to support their families. So there continue to be inequities. Where I'm most passionate is around the work of helping close the gap in the skilled construction trades, whether that is by any dimension of diversity, where we may see that there is lower rates of unemployment in certain communities, but then there are higher instances where individuals are not able to benefit from some of those opportunities, either because of some experiences that they may be having in their own life in terms of their family structure, having their educational inequities. Let's face it, our public school systems are not supporting and delivering in our communities as they should. There are other barriers to employment that if they were somehow closed, even in a small way, such as the ability to be proficient in math and science, could lead to taking advantage of some of those opportunities that exist. But the playing field is not level. And as one of the richest countries in this world, we're falling short in many, many areas. And so being passionate around how do we help have an impact while we are here to impact the lives of those that won't have the opportunity to sit in this room that we're in today, or won't have the opportunity to occupy an office or workspace. And how do we create those opportunities by closing some of those gaps that exist? And it is unfortunate in my experience that we are still seeing this, and we're seeing it at an alarming rate. And it expands beyond people of color. I mean, there are just families that are just not able to cross the finish line as many of us are.
Yeah, and I think that dovetails nicely into Collete, anything you were going to say to respond, but I'd also love to hear how, you know, your talent development tries to kind of help people who might not have had, you know, the opportunities they need or whatever to get where they need to be, and to make sure that companies are seeing their value and doing, you know, whatever it is to get everybody lifted up.
Well, legitimately, you know, if someone's basically pursuing a graduate degree in college, there's a degree of uniqueness that goes along with that, okay? So they're not totally being excluded from a pathway. I think the challenge becomes the transition from being on the pathway to getting through the door, and getting through the door at firms, with companies, in locations, with opportunities that actually are supportive of being diverse and inclusive of that diversity. So one of the things that we were talking about before is like, there's always been this discussion about diversity, and diversity is, we've talked about a little bit earlier today, it's not like the one of this and the two of those and the three of these, right? It's about having a very holistic view of what diversity can bring. It's about socioeconomic diversity, it's about gender diversity, it's about ethnic diversity, it's about cultural diversity, it's about where you came from, what you saw, what you bring in the room. It's the welcoming of all that that makes it inclusive. And we have an interesting challenge in that I think a lot of companies, a lot of platforms that are looking at the idea of being diverse is that they take it for the superficial checkoffs. And it's also very easy for them to walk away from that in times of economic adversity, because it's not the driver today. It's about the profitability today. It's not about the talent. It's not about making sure that we've got the diverse perspectives in the room. We're focused on other things. And the challenge that I'm seeing, and I'm sensing, even looking at the students that we have come through Roosevelt, who are, they're not, I wouldn't say the most advantaged, but we have a very interesting diversity of student profile at Roosevelt. It's about firms recognizing the year in, year out, up, down business value of having a diverse talent pool engaged in making the best decisions, engaged in creating an inclusive environment where people feel like they belong. And when people belong, they do better. And it's the 20% is an interesting checkoff. I mean, when you don't have, if you're not 20%, you really feel like you're isolated. But you can be less than 20% if the culture of that space makes you feel like you belong and that you're valued. And I think that it's important, at least from my role at Roosevelt these days, to help both prepare the students that come through our programs educationally, to make sure that academically they're ready to deliver when they get that role, but it's also convincing companies that they want that diverse talent, they can use that diverse talent, and that they will welcome that diverse talent. So I've got to work on both sides of that. So I got to make sure my students are ready for that, they're ready for the pluses and the minuses. I get the companies thinking about how they can be best prepared to accept that diverse talent pool. So I believe the idea of community is an interesting thing, because building communities can happen in your literal sense of how everybody thinks of community, but communities can happen in any number of spaces, and the diversity of that community will make that community, not just that place, that community, which is a gathering and a connection and a belonging of all the forces and people who are in it, work well together, be more successful. And to the extent that we can, execute that, I think that we can make a huge difference in solving a lot of things. But the diversity and inclusion piece is really something that I think we can, I think in my role, I get a chance to kind of play around with a little bit more.
Thank you. And yet we've heard this difference between diversity and inclusion. And it would be really helpful, I think, to hear from you all what you see as the difference between just straight diversity and actual inclusion. To do what you've said, Collete, is to actually make this a welcoming place where people's voices are heard no matter what percentage, 20% or regardless. I would love to hear from any of and all of you about where you have seen this kind of diversity and inclusion buzzwords actually done well and how that is achieved, and maybe where you've seen it miss the marks. And sometimes we learn from things that are not great to do the opposite of this.
Yeah, I mean, I see a lot of not great. That's it. No, I'm just kidding. I definitely have been in situations where I'll hear, well, we need a woman in the room. The client's a woman, so we need a woman in the room. You're not going to have a talking role, but be there and be a lady. And I was like, oh, okay, I'll show up. Or not even just me. So that to them is like inclusion. And I'm sure that there's men who have checked the box and been like, I was very inclusive in that meeting. I had one gay female, so I'm checking 2 boxes. I don't think that of this panel, I'm the right person to speak to diversity and inclusion in the way that these ladies would. To your previous question, I feel like my contributions in my workplace is that I stay woke. I feel like I am trying to talk realistically and openly about what it really is. I feel like 10 years ago, I didn't feel confident enough to do that. 10 years ago, I had longer hair. Some of you, unfortunately, knew me in that time, and it's come a long way. Just in terms of my comfort in myself to be somebody who's out in the workplace. But so I think the way that I'm contributing now is just like talking about issues of gender, talking about issues of race, and just things that are going on and calling a spade, which sometimes makes people a little bit uncomfortable, but I would rather make people uncomfortable than just kind of slide on by, because I feel like that's where progress happens. So I'll let them talk about the important stuff.
I would offer, certainly, it moves beyond diversity to build that true collaboration. Certainly, when we have the opportunity to be in the room and to influence who's in the room, that we have a responsibility to push the envelope. We can't just be there. We can't just show up. We need to be able to offer a perspective, because otherwise we're just holding a seat. The opportunities that I have to, when asked my viewpoint or my perspective or the perspective of my community, if you will, I am readily one to admit I cannot speak for all people, but I will tell you what I think. And sometimes that is not received very well, because I have to call it like I see it, right? And we can look at the numbers, we can look at the metrics, I can look at where we started, I can look at where we are now, and it hadn't changed much. But soon, it's not going to matter, because it's going to change on its own through the natural evolution of things. And we can either get out in front of it and be a part of that change, if you will. I don't know, what am I sounding like right here? But you can be a part of it, or it's going to happen with or without your input. So it's more important that we're a part of the conversation, and that's when inclusion truly happens, when we can each bring our true selves to work. We can feel comfortable expressing who we are. We can feel comfortable dressing who we are. We walk on job sites every day and may experience some things. I was just reading a report published by the EEOC Commission in terms of some of the atrocities that are happening in the work environment that are still existing yet today, and it's very disappointing. And so trying to be a voice in those instances and calling it out when we see it, and having some impact to impact change, if you will, because there are women and others that are working in these environments and sometimes can't speak out for themselves. So when we have a truly inclusive environment, it should be one that we can speak out without fear of retribution. But unfortunately, it does exist.
I love that idea, of just using your own voice to create space for others as well. It can be as simple as that. Collete, did you have anything to add to this?
I know you were asking about the difference between diversity and inclusion, and I tried to get to that a bit, but I think an example of diversity is similar to what Emily said. I remember when I was still at Peru, and I would have broker pitches. And so, I'm making the decision of who's going to get a pitch, who's going to get a deal. And okay, back to most of the teams in the room were all male. They were the ones who were making all the money, which is why there's such disparity, right? It's just the way it is. But anyway, so after having made a statement at a CBRE event that I was really tired of seeing all male teams pitched to me, the next team up actually had a young woman as part of the team. And I thought it was rather interesting. I was like, oh, that's great. Hey, they've got a young woman on the team. Well, not really. She was not and a true member of the team. She was a support person who they really felt they needed to bring in the room to show that they had some diversity. I unfortunately got to call them out on that during the pitch and afterwards. So it's like, don't patronize me. I know she's not really part of your team. She admitted she's not really part of your team. You need to really develop a diverse team of talent that is actively engaged and fully participatory in what you're doing. If you do anything other than that, you're not promoting, you're not moving down the road of any degree of truly functional diversity. And then, oh, by the way, that diversity needs to really feel as though they are valued, that their viewpoint is considered, that they are part of what is going on. If it's anything less than that, just inviting them in the room is not being diverse or inclusive. And the inclusion part is a real struggle for a lot of places. I mean, it's not just real estate. I mean, every business has this as an issue. It's, I don't think anybody's really totally fixed it anywhere. But as we have an increasingly diverse universe of humans who are in the workforce, who are in the world, finding ways that they can be truly welcomed in and included in what you're doing is the only way that you really maximize the value they bring to the table, you maximize the value you give to them, and you create the mutually successful space, no matter what that is, be it a not-for-profit, be it a for-profit, be it, an academic environment. It's the welcoming space where people can be who they are, they're welcomed for who they are, and they can contribute from where they come. And I think that that's the challenge we have. Diversity is not really as big an issue anymore as it is inclusiveness, because there are a whole bunch of folks in space, right? I mean, you can look at this room. There are a lot more of us in our companies than were in our companies 30 years ago. There are a lot more people of color. We have, every way you want to slice and dice diversity, it exists in our firms. But can we honestly say our firms are inclusive? That our firms are really allowing everybody to bring their true self, as Linda said, be their real selves, not code switching in order to have a conversation, not, they can be who they are and still be valued for who they are. And I think that's the difference.
Absolutely. And that inclusion not being kind of completely figured out anywhere is so important, and that's kind of the missing piece in some ways. And we have a diversity of women here from experience perspective. There might be a woman in the room who's thinking, I feel like I'm the underrepresented group, and how do I lift my voice? There might be someone in this room that's saying, I'm a manager here, and I want to leverage diversity. I want to promote inclusion. If you could give, or there might be people in the world who's in the room who are in a position to refer and to actually change those statistics that we heard in the presentation of the white paper. If you could all give any or all of those women, you can pick one or think of all of them, one kind of tangible thing they can do. And maybe that is cut your hair and just be you, right? But one thing, if that is find a mentor, whatever it is that you think is really one of the more important things for helping to create that inclusion that we're really striving for, to get to that next level, if you can do that we can do in our lives.
Yeah, the more you can get comfortable in your own skin, the better, right? I feel like I grew into my confidence over a while, but honestly, I had a lot of visibility. I would see people like Collete when I was 24, when I didn't know anything, and I would be like, man, she is a boss. If she can do it, then maybe I could get there part way one day, And two, I think maybe a tangible thing that we can do is be real. For me, I recognize my white privilege. I feel like that's something that I can tangibly do to impact my environment, whether it's at work or in my family or in my social setting. I think it's something that 10 years ago I probably was like, oh, well, yeah, I know it's out there, but now I feel like there's enough information readily available to all of us that we can kind of take a look at what's actually going on. And I feel like I was very fortunate. I had a lot of opportunity provided for me And I hustled really hard, but there were a lot of doors that were already open for me. And for that, I'm super thankful, but I recognize it, and I feel like that's important.
What privilege was that?
That would be white privilege.
Okay. Well, there you go, and I appreciate that. I guess I would offer to lead with heart. In knowing what I do and how I do every day, I can't go wrong if I lead with heart. That means slowing down enough to spend time with someone that may want to just talk. They want to just, hey, I want to explore an idea. Do you have time? You know, just spending a few minutes, because I often say you never know what side of the table you're going to be sitting on. And somewhere along the way, if you are really living your values, it comes through as being authentic. And when we can be authentic, it doesn't take a lot of work. It takes time. And sometimes it's there because you need to hear it, not so much of what you're imparting. I'm a woman of faith, and I often ask the universe to help me receive the messages that are intended for me, and I never know where those messages are going to come. You've delivered just in this body, being with you, man journey. I got that now. I understand that. But leading with heart. And if that doesn't resonate with you as you're heading somewhere, just slow it down a minute and finding a way to have an impact, because when you give, it comes back tenfold. I believe that. I've lived my life that way.
I think one of the interesting observations I've come up with lately is that when we talk about some of the challenges we're having around diversity and inclusion, when you do it in a room like this, you almost get the sense that we think we know the answer and that we are obviously doing it right and they're not. I think we have to be honest that each of us is holding some aspect of who we are, how we were raised, what our cultures and values are, that may in fact not make us the standard bearer of the perfect supporter of diversity and inclusion that needs to be, sitting in our companies going, you need to do it this way. I think we all would benefit from being clear of ourselves where we can do better to understand, appreciate, and promote true diversity and inclusion. Not take it for granted that we know what it is, not take it for granted that we're doing it right. And then once we own that need to learn that, once we own that gap, work to close it. And when we work to close it, bring someone else with you. Because it says everybody's got a blind spot. Everybody's got something they're just not doing that great. I don't care how open-minded, inclusive, community building you are. We all have a blind spot. And I think that uniquely, because of some of the challenges that women have around the workplace in particular, we probably come at this with some very interesting perspectives. We can also learn from where we came and how we can help move the ball by improving what we do, what we see, what we act upon in our environment, in our companies, in our communities, to help bridge that gap for somebody else. So I want to believe that we all know what's wrong and everybody else is the problem and we're the right ones and we get it totally, because we have been the ones who've been downtrodden in much of this conversation, along with like 10 million other people, or 10 zillion other people. But I think it would be great if we just all look at our own personal unconscious biases, our personal gaps, own those, and see how we can help others own theirs, and then we'll be better able to help bring others along. Because if we all kind of get it, it'll be easier for us to bring people in the house, bring people to the table, bring people into the conversation, bring that inclusiveness. But we have to start here instead of assuming that we're the downtrodden all the time, because we're not. We're not perfect in this. So that was my 2 cents on that one.
Thank you guys so much. All just such valuable information to share, perspective to share. We do, at this point, we are running up on the time that we would love to open it up to audience questions. So if anyone in the audience has anything that they'd like to ask, we'd love to take it. And maybe introduce yourself before you ask your question.
My name is Sue Myers, and I work for Assurance. I'm a crew member and also on board. And when Julie went through this paper, she talked about one of the helpful things of women advancing is finding a mentor. How did you guys find mentors? Because if you look around, I mean, I'm sure there wasn't always someone who looked exactly like you or thought exactly like you. Like, I'm sure you had mentors, and you talked about having lights in your life that led you along the way. Like, how did you find these mentors, and then how did you get them to be mentors?
So in the study around mentorship, we learn often you have them for a time and for a season, and at different places in your life, whether it's a professional mentor, it could be a spiritual mentor. So along the way, I seem to have gravitated towards those leaders that I looked up to and admired. And often it started with a conversation. And in many of those conversations, what I soon came to realize is that they were gathering as much from me as I was gathering from them. And what I pride myself in doing, I have, again, folks that have been along my journey, whether it's been a formal mentor or an informal mentor, is on a regular basis, I keep in my calendar, make touch-base calls. And so with those folks that have been influential in my life, I now take responsibility for reaching to them and just having a conversation, one, to thank them, two, to listen in case there's still another nugget that they can pour into me. But then also for me to, as my friend said, be a light to others. So while I've had a number of mentors along my journey, I seek now to serve in that role to others. And finding them relative to the stage that I might be in my life and in my career. So for example, I'm newly married, so I'm 8 years newlywed, right? My parents had a beautiful 63-year marriage. Well, I likely, unless I live to be really, really old, will not be able to benefit from a 63-year marriage. But I do seek to be a good wife and good partner in my marriage. And so I've begun to seek out other men or women that have had or are having successful marriages. So I seek that type of mentorship for this stage in my life and always stay in a state of learning. So there are different mentors for different stages in your life. And then commit to being a mentor yourself to share it back. Does that give you perspective?
Thank you.
Do you want to? I mean, I would pursue any mentor, any person that I would meet in business, definitely women. If they were in a meeting, I would pursue them, not stalk them, but pursue them and let them know that I wanted to meet with them. And if I was lucky enough to meet with them, then continue the relationship. And a mentorship, it's not like a Hallmark Channel kind of mentorship. Sometimes it's a lunch, sometimes it's a coffee, sometimes it's you see each other at events like this, and there's a kindred interaction. But I've learned something from so many different levels of interaction. So if you see people that are doing the work that you want to be doing, I think you just go after them respectfully.
Any other questions?
Emily, you mentioned that as you gotten more comfortable in your skin and get older, you're able to say and talk about other things or other meetings. How has that reaction been from some of the people you talked to about it? Has it been positive? Has it been negative in business or like?
Yeah. I mean, it's not just like gay stuff, right? I mean, the gay stuff's there. But I think that's just how I was raised, is to kind of shoot from the hip a little bit and just be real with the situation. I think it makes people feel a little uncomfortable. Like, I know when I said white privilege, everybody just probably got a little bit awkward, because it's an awkward thing to talk about. And I feel like that's part of the problem. And there's obviously other things that are awkward to talk about. So I think it depends. And, you know, for me, like, I work in creative services now more so. And so that's a much more diverse environment, you know, and I see younger gay kids coming up in the ranks, and I'm lucky to be in more of a leadership role. And so hopefully for them, I provide some level of visibility, but I kind of don't even really think about that anymore. Not like I used to. But I think it depends on the room. You know, there's very conservative white Republican men that I work with that are gonna stay that way, and they're just gonna have to deal with the fact that we're here. And we is a diverse we. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, you know, and I feel comfortable in making them uncomfortable, so that's pretty much it.
Sure.
Emily, I love that sentiment about being okay with the group being a little uncomfortable. And interesting that you mentioned that, because as our committee was putting together this event, that was one of our objectives, to that we felt that if people were a little bit uncomfortable, that's how you grow, you know, is by stretching a muscle, then we would have accomplished something. So thank you for mentioning that. But I was curious to know from all of you, with the political environment that we're sitting in today, yes, how does that impact what you see in the opportunity, the promise, the hope that we have of having a more diverse and inclusive workforce in commercial real estate and in everything else? I mean, what do you see there? Is there an impact? Do you feel it in any way?
Ooh, I think fortunately the demographics are going to override some of this. In that naturally, with the die-off of old school and the ramp up of a much more diverse population, some of this will take care of itself no matter what people may want to think. The current political environment, I want to believe, is a passing moment, but it will have lingering effects. And the lingering effects of much more open negativity around diverse communities, much more harsh or much more emphasized social inequity in many places is a problem. Commercial real estate may or may not find itself a little insulated from some of that. But I don't want to, from my perspective, say it's not going to be a big deal. It is a big deal. I mean, it's just hard to really pinpoint how that will influence the workforce, influence how many of us will do business in this space. Commercial real estate tends to be perceived as, you know, they're the big buildings on Wacker Drive, which are really only 5% of the world. The rest of the commercial real estate, smaller deals. And there will be ways that people who can carry on more restrictive and more narrow-minded ways of functioning will do that. But I think it's really hard to put the two together right now. I do think that commercial real estate can find a way to be an influencer in how it wants to conduct itself on a business level, how it wants to conduct itself in a way of being a diverse and inclusive environment, how it may want to provide outreach into more challenged environments, add value to help balance out some of the other things, because this industry has a ton of money. And it can potentially use that influence in ways to maybe mitigate some of that impact selectively, but it's kind of hard to put all the pieces together. Some of the policies coming out of here will have negative impacts on things, and which will filter its way into how some people will conduct their business. But I think the large scale guys are going to do it the right way because their clients are going to demand that they do it the right way. CalSTRS, CalPERS, state of Florida, these guys have very diverse employees contributing those funds that they're giving to these managers to invest in these deals, and they are going to move, I think, to aggressively enforce their concerns about diversity and inclusion in how they invest their monies. And so that will provide a degree of ballast, but not necessarily, it can't do it by itself, but that's my 2 cents on that one.
So I have a question kind of following up with that. So as they request these things of fund managers and kind of going to construction, will we be able to address it in a timely manner with the request? So because there's been discrimination in construction, has that capacity been built so that when the CalPERS make the ask of the projects that are being developed, as far as seeing a certain percentage or seeing more diverse, especially in underutilized, not just, facilities management or janitorial services, but, professional services and other things, is there going to, do you see there being a gap between, the ask and then there actually being diverse firms to, that have the capacity to address that ask?
If you don't mind, I welcome your question. And what's your name?
Michelle, I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. Michelle Flagg, and my company is Red Acre Solutions. And I'm
Thank
in
you.
Worker.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. Certainly, we can see as we started the dialogue that there is a skills gap. And the workforce, the skilled workforce is aging, and we've known that. And then the professional workforce that manages the skilled workforce is really starting to trend where Carrie and her peers in this work are now moving into leadership roles, because we do have the gap in the mighty middle, right? We do have those that are making decisions about our next assignment, the level of risk that we're managing. They're aging out, essentially. And I think there's a natural attrition in terms of how those decisions will be made. But we do see a skills gap, if you will, in order to be able to meet the demands. I would say, just by sheer numbers, approximately 65% of our portfolio is within the public sector, if you will. We build for public sector clients. And that's inherent to having commitments around business inclusion and workforce inclusion. We do see it trending that now our private sector clients are bringing those same commitments, either due to a funding stream or the social responsibility commitments around their decision making in terms of their culture. So we are seeing a gap. We can't seem to train up and invest more in terms of bringing new entrants into the industry, because many folks are seeking and doing other things now. This isn't sort of the way that they may have found to make an investment in their careers. And so there will need, in my view, to be some considerations given on how we close that gap as those decision makers are moving into those leadership roles. Perhaps we can begin to soften, not the expectations. One thing that we see very much within our industry, it's about where you went to school and who did you know, and those informal networks. And now it's being spoken of in the talent management process about non-traditional pathways to engagement. But when we look at those in a leadership role, and we take it all the way back to where they went to school, they may not have had what we are asking new entrants into the industry to have. And it turned out okay. So some softening of what success looks like in terms of coming into the industry, and I'm speaking specifically construction in this instance, I think is going to be inherent to our success. Because you can teach the technical skills, but it's that broader influence and investment that will need to be made in order to close that gap, in my view.
Other questions?
I think we're running up on time, so if we have one more, that would be great. Yeah.
I think Emily, you mentioned like being the token female in the room. So I'm Leslie Nutzer. I work at Kimley Horn. We're a civil engineering firm. As many here, we're very not diverse in many facets. And you spoke to the token female, and that's kind of been a lot of our interviews. And bring Jenny along because she's a female, and that looks good, to your point. And that's looked at negatively by that said female because it's like, I'm just here because of my gender, not because of my talent. My typical advice in that situation is just, instead of focusing on the negative, like, take it as an opportunity to, bring something to the table as opposed to, now you might not be given that opportunity because the men might suppress you or whoever, but like, that's been my advice. I guess, what is your advice in that situation, or how? Because I feel like going to the men in the room and saying like, hey, don't do it that way, or that's not appropriate, is not gonna work, but.
That's not gonna work.
Right.
I do think you're onto something. I think the idea of looking at the opportunity from the young women's perspective, to look at being able to be in the room as a chance to learn something, as a chance to pick up some tips on something that she can potentially comment on later. I do think that many of us are incredibly empathetic. We see people, we see things differently. And, while I was complaining about the young admin who was in that meeting, I am so hopeful that she basically went back and said, I saw that you guys really didn't do that well. Maybe there's some input she can provide. She can learn something that she can utilize in the next opportunity she has that may not be quite so fraught with tokenism. It can be hard on the ego when you know that you're there just because they need to fill a spot. And many of us have been in that situation. Even the most benign thing, when you're the token in the space and no one is really, inviting you there for your knowledge. What we have to get around that to see is that you are being exposed to something you might not have gotten exposed to otherwise, and use that experience to build on your talents, your knowledge, so the next time you have a better chance of being able to bring something to that conversation and have value that then positions you for something else.
Well, and stand in your greatness. You are bringing a perspective to the table that likely your clients are going, whew, yeah, okay, let us hear something different, versus droning on in what we think we know they want. we're intuitively able to pick up on things. You know, you can read a situation very differently, perhaps than others are in the room. And when your intuition will never do you wrong. Follow it, own it, live it, and whether it is a nugget that you've been able to find out, again, taking it back to the team, or connecting with your client. You will find a connection because somewhere along the way, your intuition will be able to guide you to having your piece of that you can own and that you can bring to any situation that you're in.
Oh, another thing, if you're a young woman in the room and there's a woman on the other side, on the client side, you know, after the meeting's over, drop them a note. You got a card. Drop them a note. It was so nice to meet you. I was really, you know, I'd love to hear more about what you do. Use that as a stepping stone to build another pathway of a network. In every situation, back to let's look at the good part of it. You know, I think we need to encourage that sort of outreach too, because that will likely be very welcomed. You know, a young person reaches out to a senior person on email or just drops a call, and who of us have said, no, I won't have coffee with you? You know, that's a great way to also build a different path that may be very helpful personally and with the team.
Well, thank you all for obviously our panelists. Can we give them one last amazing round of applause for everything they had to offer? It's so appreciated. And thank you to all of you for your questions and your engagement. And I'm going to turn it over to Carrie for the next part of our presentation.
Before the panelists go to town, I would love it if the panelists could split themselves up between the tables, because the next section is the small group discussion.
I'll go wherever.
No two panelists at the same table. And I would also love it if that table in the back there, the troublemakers, could split up among the other tables as well.
Like our table at all. Wow, that was really good.
Within your small groups, in the time span of 10 minutes, we would like you to discuss 2 quick notes. Where have you seen a struggle with inclusion in your workplace? And how can your workplace be more inclusive? Please pick a scribe and somebody who will report out at the end of 10 minutes.
Ladies, thank you so much. Thank you all so much. How about we begin our sharing time? So the first question, where have you seen a struggle with inclusion in your workplace? Table number 1. Michelle?
So some of the things that we talked about is having a voice, being in STEM, so unrepresented
Fields that are traditionally underrepresented by women. And then bring others up. So when you are considered the token, making sure that you bring others up when you have that opportunity.
We had a couple examples, well, Hannah shared, just men not knowing the right questions to ask at interviews and being inappropriate and not really coming from probably a place of wanting to do good, but in turn being inappropriate and non-inclusive, and signaling people out based on gender or other.
That's a very nice way to put it.
Was that helpful? Was that good? Sorry. And then we discussed like a knowledge gap, particularly with men in senior positions, of just not knowing things that they don't know, not knowing how to truly be supportive of us. Right? And mostly of the inclusion perspective, and acknowledging that there's not a lot of like huge major
bad things that people are doing, it's more just a lot of little things that are making a cumulative impact. And then we kind of acknowledge that all of us have been witness to a boys club lunch or a boys club fishing trip and literally passing over a female's cube to ask said male next to her
Would you
to
like to
go.
golf?
Right.
Yeah.
So how to, and then in turn, if all of the girls, women go to lunch, then that's a bitch session / that's looked at negatively, where in turn it's not the double standard and all that, so.
That was nice. Yeah?
Good.
Come on, Sarah.
Okay, so we sort of saw struggle with inclusion in a lot of different places, probably which you'll all agree with. I wrote down, ageism. Also, there's just sort of the obvious ones as, religion, looks, talking about, being a token female sometimes in the room or in the committee. And also like if certain jobs are considered more female versus male and how is that changing, thankfully. And a lot of it can be sort of unconscious, like accidentally hiring people who are like you, or also just having men who are maybe your senior or something, thinking, saying something they think is a joke and really can be taken a completely different way, but they just don't know any better. We didn't get to the second question, sorry.
Well, you can go ahead and say.
We just have a lot of feelings.
We
just have a lot of feelings we want to talk about all the time.
Does anybody else have an answer to how can your workplace be more inclusive? One of the things that we talked about at this table was maybe we could tell the men to try and think about inviting the women and not making the women invite themselves.
I'll speak just for myself. Funny thing is my workplace is actually, there's only 15 of us, but it's more women than men. And there are times when my direct boss is a man, and I'm just like, I don't wanna, talk to him much necessarily. So I organized a females only, happy hour, ladies, let's just go out. Also did a work lunch, and he was a little hurt because he got left behind, but I'm just like, whatever. So the funny thing is, I try to be as inclusive as possible, but it felt okay to not be inclusive of the men, because it was just sometimes, just talk to the women about, what's happening in the workplace. So go out there and include yourself in whatever you want.
So I'm going to do a little twist on this. How can crew be more inclusive? Invite the men in for conversation. Because we're all preaching to the choir in many instances. How can we have an honest conversation without the fear of reprisal? So Carrie and I will invite our boss here locally. He'd come and he'd listen. And I happen to have an advocate in him. But I would say begin to find an opportunity to share what all of this energy that we have here by giving exposure in a non-threatening way. They might learn something. Because when we see them interacting with their families, with their significant other, their partner, their wife, whatever, it's like they're different people. It's like, well, why don't you bring him to work at times? And so I would just challenge you all to think about having an opportunity to have this conversation in a non-threatening environment so they may learn something.
To add to that, so we brought up earlier about having our own blind spots. Yes. And as far as trying to include men, so like she said earlier, a lot of times it's a lot of little cumulative things, not that we don't have overtly negative men out there, but let's take that small percentage out and take the millions of small things that come up. So in a non-threatening way, we can include these men in conversations where we point out blind spots and encourage them. Speak up and ask questions. You don't know your blind spot till you ask us. So just encouraging them to speak up and ask questions. I encourage women to speak up every chance they get. I'm like, I don't even care if your point makes sense, just speak up, be visible, learn language. So I think encouraging men to ask questions and letting them know, we recognize we have our own blind spots, but we're letting you know you have blind spots. But that doesn't have to be a big thing, just ask questions. We are more than happy to give our opinions.
So we kind of did that, last year to, this is being recorded now.
Please state your name.
And the picture on it. So we sat down, we had a couple of issues that happened maybe a year ago with some women, and so a couple of us got together and said, okay, we need to do more than just, we're meeting 2 times, just the women outside of work, just to help at different times, performance times, different times when they should ask. And so, put this whole thing together, and we sat down with our owners group, which is all men. And they were all great ideas, good things, we're like, okay, great. And the 2 younger women that went in, so it was myself and another executive, and then 2 fresh trainers come in. And they've been disappointed because actually, we're looking for the ownership group to have some piece of it. Be part of it with us. But they're actually looking for us to do it all again. Do you know what I mean? Organize it, set it up, not just do it and include them, but not be part of the planning part of it, which kind of gets back to us as women a little bit. We take care of it, we get it done, we organize it, and we're looking for them as the owners to be in it full force, be part of it, help with the decisions, help with the planning. And they're like, okay, great, you do it, come forward.
Yeah, but it's happened that way all their lives,
Right.
likely.
Probably.
Someone has taken the lead and.
So some of that younger generation then again is turned off by that. Because they are not being in it. They're hearing us, but they're not really hoping to totally solve the problem.
I was at a Navy conference yesterday on diversity and inclusion, and there was a very interesting, this reminded me of something, it's a very interesting statistic, talking about how young women see themselves in the world and how young men see the world. So we talked about what happens when we're in college and as we're adults and women looking forward to being more progressively advanced in their careers and moving ahead. What does like the 10 to 17-year-old crowd, how do they see themselves? And interestingly, the women seem to still be very positively inclined toward advancement in their careers and being, upwardly mobile and successful and all of that. The boys are traditional. The 10 to 17-year-olds are still talking about more traditional relationships between men and women. Meaning that, mom at home, dad, worker, and so I think we have to think about that, right? So we're trying to, you talk about the older generation harboring some of these, the women do all they get stuff done and we just kind of stand here and write the check and show up. I think that is not too wildly removed from the women kind of get stuff done, but we are the leaders here and you're just kind of there's an interesting dynamic going on in this generation behind us. We're thinking that they're much more balanced and exposed and their moms are working or they're seeing all of this advancement and balancing out of gender roles. There still seems to be a very strong leaning toward more traditional alignment of the sexes.
Really? Right, they're pining for the simpler life.
Yes, like in our politics, we're pining for the way it was.
Yep.
It's so interesting, and I feel like it's so important to remember that, it's not just about at home or at work, but it also starts at home too. So like when you're having conversations with your husband or your friends that are male or your son or whoever it is, your cousin, like that is so interesting because a woman, let's say, who is in a marriage with a man who has this idea, even though they're equal or whatever, and they go pursue their careers and now they have a baby or something, if they're not on the same page about what advancement looks like for both of them, that's gonna affect that woman's ability to get what she wants in her career just as much as, anything that's happening in her workplace. So that's so interesting, and it really makes you expand your thoughts about like what can we do, certainly in our workplace, but also just outside of the workplace, it seems like. Yeah.
It's bringing them into conversations. We cannot continue to talk to ourselves.
Right.
Okay, we've got to talk to the guys, and we've got to talk to them where they are. Okay, it is not about the confrontation in the workforce. It's not about the HR review. It's not about the, called up on what did you say in that interview kind of stuff. It's not that. It's the more casual interface we have with every man in our lives about being more aware of what's going on in the world and how to be a more inclusive and engaged and equal partner in everything. And hopefully it trickles down. Because when you think about it, 10 to 17-year-olds, we have a lot of members who have we have sons in that age group. And these kids are going to college together, and it's a dynamic.
I've often thought that a key to turning this dynamic around is through men in the workplace who have really capable, smart daughters. Those men who are watching their daughters, come up and go to business school and become successful and have all this promise. And they're seeing things suddenly maybe in a different way, these executives. And I really think that catching those people can really be helpful.
And I think that happens, but then they are older, because those daughters then are 20, 22, 25, and they're seeing that. But it's taken those 25 years, 30 years to get it, and I've seen that happen.
Yes.
So I was going to have another breakout session for this set of questions, but I think that we've really covered a lot of these already. So in the next 10 minutes, and I just want to do a time check, it is 7 o'clock for those of you that need to catch trains. No one is going to be offended if you have to leave to catch a train. But if in our last 10 minutes to discuss and then 5 minutes to report out, please discuss at your tables what is one thing that you can commit to do beginning tomorrow, personally or professionally, to help encourage diversity and inclusion. So 10 minutes, starting now. All right.
I know, I got the email the other day, sending it out tomorrow. I haven't been in the office, so I haven't been.
Table number 1. Mary, what are you going to do tomorrow?
Yes! Get it, Mary.
Is she like managing partner? You can actually change them.
I'm a managing partner of an accounting firm, so I have a lot of power.
Hashtag lead box.
Yeah. You should see my coffee cup. I work with a lot of our young leaders that are coming up, and we're in the process of going through getting that next level for transition. And we have probably more than 50% are women, but there are men that are in that group. And I want to bring to the table some of these things that we've been talking about, because to get their mindset thinking about it, we have partners that are probably my age, maybe a little bit younger, and it's a 50-50 male-female, and I bring it to their attention when they cross the line, when they say things that are like, really? But just to make sure that they're aware of what they're doing, because it was never said before. No one ever told you, hey, you stepped over the line, and when you're in a position that you can't control their paycheck, it's a little bit harder, but that's what my plan is.
Give to Jerry.
A couple of the other things we talked about at our table is mentoring, both men and women. So not one or the other, but both. Being persistent, engaging, encouraging the folks on our team to speak up, giving them the mic, and helping to encourage them to be the one that takes the stuff. The last item that I had on my list is using this platform to move diversity forward, using our voice to talk about our peers with management and others, and continually encouraging others to seek diversity.
I don't know what you my group has nominated me as speaker. So I guess I'll share. Throw a meeting outside. My one thing I'm getting, we had a lot of really good ones, and they all just were so excited and passionate about it. And they all went to do it now, so I couldn't wait to get started. So.
I just got done.
My thing that I was gonna do, our firm, Janet, my firm, we have, as far as firms go, have pretty good, inclusive gender diversity. But one area where we sometimes lose our female associates is after they have children, which is common in a lot of places. And so I thought, as the panel was speaking and as we've been discussing that, I'm gonna reach out to one woman in particular who just is transitioning back and just kind of spend the time to follow up and just see how she's actually doing and if there's anything she needs or is thinking about. And just that extra kind of time can just make so much of a difference when there's someone who's, because I just went through that, so when there's somebody who you can talk to and you can use as a resource. So that's what I'm gonna do tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. All right.
We're gonna invite ourselves to lunch. Was fun. Give sass back to the males of the office when it's given to us. And then calling people out, when things are said appropriately and not to embarrass them, but just make the comment correct and move on and move past.
Great.
All right, well, that concludes our program for this evening. I would love to thank, once again, all of our panelists for taking the time and coming out tonight. I would also like to thank all of the attendees and the subcommittee for making this such a wonderful experience. And also, very importantly, I would like to thank our sponsor, Polsinelli, who provided such a lovely venue and space for us. So with that, ladies, thank you so much for coming. As a reminder, our next event is November 13th, and it's Encouraging and Rewarding Risk. So if you would like to learn more about encouraging and rewarding risk as an innovative leader, please attend. It will be here on November 13th in the evening.